Good evening, good afternoon, good whatever it is, wherever you are. My name is Isaac, and I'm here with my friend Bruno. We're two business-minded engineers, and we're exploring the puzzle of innovation, product development, and so on. And on today's podcast episode, we're looking at that super simple question that has super simple answers that I'm sure everybody will easily agree with. And the question is, what or how do you or what determines your organization's culture? Super simple. So hand it off to you, Bruno, to give us the simple answers to this simple question.
Ooh, I guess I'm gonna immediately muddy the water with some contrarian stuff. So there is this dominant narrative in business circles, LinkedIn, etc. Like culture is how you do things around here, which is extremely simplistic and can even be dangerous. I mean, we just need to draw on the work from anthropologists like Gregory Bateson, Margaret Mead, etc., and people that came after them, Hawkins, etc. And they actually position that taking such approach leads to dangerous generalizations, putting people in buckets, thinking that we can categorize specific traits or activities that somehow together will define the culture, and culture is this thing that you can mechanistically change, while what have been learning is completely opposite. Like that's just not true. It's perfectly possible that the culture would remain the same even if, like, you and I would leave the organization, and the culture could be able to perpetuate itself for better or worse. So kind of when I think from this, let's say, it's not correct to say more modern, because this stuff is also now almost like 50 or something years old, that the focus is that culture resides in the relationships and habits that happen between the people. But once it gets separated from these people, it can continue self-perpetuating, almost like a living system. So I leave the organization, and even though I'm not there anymore, if what I've been doing with others turned into habits, the organization will keep doing that. And that works for both good and bad things.
And vice versa too, right? So the cultural organization, after you leave, hopefully in a positive way, will keep impacting you, and you will take that mind virus and you will go to the next organization where what you bring, if it matches some need of the organization at the time, and you are also lucky and you manage to convey it, this mind virus will infect the next organization. So it's almost, that's why I do see it as a mind virus. It can perpetuate, it can replicate by itself, even outside of the host.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's I don't know if I would call it the virus, but yes, that's true as well. Like, you can transplant parts of organization culture to another organization. And I mean, what is, I guess we could go also philosophical. What is an organization? There is a business organization, and within it, there's many sub-organizations as well. So here, I guess, as long as there's more than one person, we're really talking about organizations. And another interesting thing is, it's maybe a crude example, but if you know the monkey experiment. So are you familiar with it? Well, even if you're not, I need to share it, because
I think I know which one you mean, but go ahead.
Yeah. So just gonna share it because of the listeners. There was a monkey experiment where there was a ladder, and on top bananas were hanging, and a group of monkeys were put in this enclosure. And when one monkey would go up, everybody would get sprinkled with ice cold water. So after some time, whenever one monkey would try to climb up, the other monkeys would beat him up or her up, because they didn't want to get sprinkled by ice cold water. What was interesting, once the monkeys started rotating, so they would put in new monkeys would do the things even if they didn't know what the punishment was. But even worse, once they removed the banana and removed the punishment, the remaining monkeys continued doing this punishment, perpetuating this punishment, even after all the original monkeys that were actually receiving punishment were removed. So by now, a completely new cohort of monkeys replaced them. They would still perpetuate the punishment. And this is kind of thing, culture isn't just how we do things around here. It's much more than that, because if it was just how we do things around here, it would immediately stop by removing a toxic person, for example.
Yeah, to that gives me an opportunity to mention what I had in mind originally when we were discussing that question. There is this idea that a culture is defined by that which you tolerate and by that which you promote. But as you say that story, clearly, if you say, oh, I don't tolerate, there's somebody, for example, he's a great performer, he brings in the sales, he is amazingly creative, dynamic, whatever, but he's really has a horrible influence on everyone around. Like, the organization gets great things done, sometimes, more often than not, but it comes at an insane cost to everyone else. Maybe people get burned out. Maybe people they don't want to work on this project if that person is in there. The story you told means that if I say, oh, the organization's culture is defined by the fact that this person is tolerated. Why? Because he brings in the money. We don't know what would happen if this person would not be here. We'd rather not test it, because that's actually counterfactual that people are not willing to test because it hurts, possibly financially. But the thing is, if you were to say, oh, so if you don't tolerate that person, remove him or her from the organization, then suddenly things change. Well, yes and no. My experience has been that often, yes, temporarily things might change. There will be a relief, but usually what happens is the constellation around that person that has established itself is also like the monkeys and the banana tree. They almost need that person. They have gotten used to the presence of that person, because that person gives them a reason to complain and band together, to justify why some things are bad or cannot be done and so on. Because, hey, not everyone is like that person, and you can't expect me to be like that person, because that person has no life, is this, is that, and so on. So just by removing that one person who supposedly, if you tolerate that person, that is defining the culture in a bad way, what will happen is very likely the rest of the organization, so the culture will route around it, will find something else to deflect on. And very often, what I've seen happening is that somebody else will step into that vacuum and might not become the same insufferable idiot like the other guy, but might still find opportunity to take it upon himself or herself to say, well, position is open now, so I have the excuse, because people have gotten used to dealing with such a character, so I can be that character now. So it's not entirely clear to me that there's a sustainable change in the culture, positive, let alone positive, when you say you remove that malignant element. And so then the question is, what you do then? What you do with that person?
Yeah. So, well, what you shared is exactly why I shared earlier that culture is more than set of behaviors, because removing the toxic high performer creates a power vacuum. And because there's a history of that everybody has witnessed that specific things are rewarded, get shit done, and get you good things, there will be a new contender arising, filling in that spot. And obviously that person was enabled by more than one factor. So if you think about families and generations, changing culture requires multiple generations.
Absolutely.
Like, you cannot shift culture significantly in a single generation. The only way to significantly shift culture in a single generation is extreme trauma. That's the only way. Of course, a good thing about organizational culture, its generations are much shorter. We are potentially talking about several years at most. So we are not talking about decades and decades and decades. And we just have a great example in Boeing, like how their culture was rotting. It didn't happen overnight. They didn't start making bad aeroplanes overnight. that was a slow, degrading process of different cultures, like combating each other, colliding, parts moving away, parts replacing, and the fix that is coming, if it's not delivered in the form of blunt force trauma, will take many generations to actually replace all the bad and inadequate practices.
Yeah. Yeah, I do see that also, that it's, to put it differently, it's not that which you know, that which you tolerate that defines it. It's, to bring tie it back to a previous episode, it's what you compromise on and with what time horizon. For example, there's, and basically not compromise, because compromise will still be okay, but what you sacrifice is the worst thing. There is something which, actually it's something I want to write about, because I found it useful as a head of product management to explain to my product managers and the teams of development how to think about making trade-offs, making conscious trade-offs in a technical system. But it can also be about price, can be about anything. It applies on anything, on many different things. You basically have three choices when you have two or three competing factors in a system. The other guy might be behavior, performance, and likelihood of people burning out around, for example. Take three factors for however many. You can, ideally, you will make a trade-off. You will say, look, this guy or this woman, she's, or whoever that is, has brings some results, has, however, some negative aspects, has a negative influence on the company. I'm willing to tolerate that for a certain amount and under certain conditions, because if I tolerate it for too much and I'm not cognizant of the unintended consequences or the unforeseeable consequences, if I'm not very, very clever, or what these behaviors have, then things will start to rot from the inside. So either I make a conscious trade-off that I say, look, we need those revenues, those profits for the next however many months, weeks. We know there's a stop to it. So you make a trade-off. Or you compromise. You say, it's out of the Pareto frontier. Compromise, it's okay. I mean, I have to deal with this because it gives me better revenues. Or what you'll do is you will sacrifice. And sacrifices are called sacrifice because if you sacrifice A for B, you sacrificed A for B because B is inherently of lower value. Otherwise, you're not sacrificing. I mean, if A has a higher value than B, and you just throw away B, you didn't sacrifice B because B was anyway worth less. And if you think in those terms, every time you sacrifice aspects of an organization to some other metric KPI, as we said in the previous episode, without thinking about the effects it has on the system, and every time you give a carte blanche, like anybody, some people can do anything, and you let it slide, so it's a repetition, and the continuing sacrifice, I think that's what causes organizations' culture to erode, and vice versa. If you look at it from the happy side, if you put an emphasis on making great trade-offs, for example, within remote or office work, sensible policies about, hey, somebody is sick, people can be sick sometimes, as long as they don't abuse the system, let's show trust to see if we get trust back. If you are conscious about the good trade-offs, and you keep doing them, your culture will improve. So there's a dynamic factor there. That's how I like to think about it.
No, I completely agree with what you have shared. And again, I'm looking at the time. We need to get a grandfather's clock or something to time those 10 minutes. I believe we shared a lot on culture. Unfortunately, I don't have anything that immediately pops to my mind. So kind of for a happy closing, except that we have to be more deliberate and pay more attention to what happens in our organizations, to act and to understand that changing culture requires time and effort, and that cultures change even if we don't do anything. So decay will set in. Taking no action is equal to taking action in some cases, and we have to be aware of that. Things seem sudden, but they have been happening for a long time before they actually have happened.
Agree. Great. So, complex question. I think we covered it as extensively as it's realistically possible in more than the time we allot ourselves. So see you on the next one with something possibly a bit less controversial. Goodbye.